Hi guys, Clem here from Online Flooring Store again for Talkin Flooring. We get a lot of questions about a lot of things, but one that comes up a little bit for people who are especially DIY enthusiasts are the different locking systems that are available in floors. And it probably deserves a bit of a breakdown because some actually, believe it or not, will perform better in other situations than others. And like, I've been around the industry for a long time. I remember when, even before locking systems came out, when everything was tongue and groove, even the early laminates were tongue and groove glue togethers, and the locking systems that came out, and how they get used. So we'll just start with, look, there's basically there's millions of locking systems, but I'm going to group them into three basic categories, right? So you've got what you call your four-sided locks, and they are ones where you lock the side and the end. Then you've got what are called drop-down locks. Now, an example of this is the 2G Valinga locking system, where there is no actual lock on the end of the board. It has a little saddle. You sort of have this on one end of the board and this comes down and it drops in. And then what locks that board into this one is the next board you lock in here, and it holds it all together. And the last one is what we refer to as the 5G locks. Now, they are somewhat of a hybrid between the two, in that the 2G locks, and even like what some call the 5GI or the drop-down locks in hybrids that hit down with a mallet, they use a very similar principle to that. The 5G lock has a recessing clip in the end of the board. And what that allows you to do is you drop the board down as if it was a 2G lock, but you give it a little press and the recessing clip engages. So it's locked like a four-sided lock, but it installs more akin to a 5G lock. There are still mostly the timber tongue and groove systems, and they will be here forever and a day because they work. But what are the advantages and what are the disadvantages of the different kinds of locking systems? Well, it quite often it comes down to licensing and who owns patents and things like that. So the four-sided locks were the first ones. Now they work in a principle of, you either get your end in and then bring your side in, or your side in, then you bring the end up. The most successful one was the Unilin lock, because unlike other locking systems like the Valinga, typically you drop your side joint in, tilt it in, bring it down, then you would have to lift the row up and bring the side in at the same time, which was quite difficult. The Unilin lock allowed you to have the product flat and then tap it up, and the lock could engage while sitting flat. So that was really revolutionary and made installation a whole lot easier with the four-sided locking systems. And Unilin, owning the patent to that and owning that design, they sort of conquered the four-sided lock area. The two-sided Valinga lock was again a very, very easy locking system to use. It dropped down, your next board locked the boards in place. It just meant around the perimeter, you had to have your skirting sitting on top of it to stop this sort of happening, because there was no actual end lock on the board. Then the 5G came along, and Valinga sort of ruled the world here, because they developed this 5G lock. You drop it down, give the board a press, and it locked into place. Unilin then came out with their answer called Multifit, but it didn't work as well, and they pulled that from the market. So kind of Valinga owned the 5G space, and Unilin owned, not that they own it, but they have the best locking systems in these spaces, Unilin in the four-sided space. But where is each locking system useful, and what are the advantages of it? So let's start with, say, hybrid, which is the thing on everyone's lips at the moment. They came out predominantly to start with a variant on the 2G, the drop down, but it needed to be hammered in because it was a tight lock. That I don't think proved to be a great locking system for a lot of floors, especially thinner ones, because that little arrangement on the top that came down was quite thin and was very easy to damage. Guys who tap it in with a hammer, sometimes you'd see little folds having across it. The better guys got a block and then would put the block down and hit the block so that the pressure was distributed evenly. But over time, I don't know that it was a great locking system. Some suppliers still use it, some successfully, but certainly with some products it didn't work particularly well. The four-sided lock in hybrid is a little difficult. The Unilin one's easy enough to install because you can put it flat and tap it up, but the Valinga ones, because the hybrid is typically thinner, and quite brittle, the wrong pressure on it can cause the end joints to be damaged. So you don't really see too many Vellinga four-sided locks in hybrid, but where you do, I don't think they're the best option because there's just not enough meat in the joints and not enough strength. Really, for me, the most successful locking system with hybrid floor has been the 5G. It's a really good balance of strength versus ease of installation and not really being able to damage your floor too much during installation. So in the hybrid space, the 5G gets the big tip. With laminate, laminate's a little bit different. So the 5G, for whatever reason, hasn't been particularly successful in laminate. It's really still a place where the four-sided lock reigns, and particularly the Unilin lock. Because in the laminate, you're dealing with a different product. It's made of different things, and it is a stronger board than the hybrid. Even though it's lighter, it's stronger. So you're able to apply a bit more force and be a bit rougher with it in installation. But once the board's locked together, there's no doubt that the four-sided lock is the strongest locking system that holds together once it's installed properly. So with laminate, I would say that the four-sided lock is the better locking system. And preferably the Unilin because it is easier to install. Then we look at, say, products like timber. Timber's a bit of a mixed bag. A lot of companies are still using the tongue and groove because they find the tongue and groove can be less noisy. You glue the product in, you don't have this finely machined locking system, and you put pressure on the floor and there's little bits of stuff rubbing together and trapping energy and creating noises as they release that energy. So the tongue and groove is still quite a successful system, and it's particularly useful when you're gluing the floor down because you don't need to lock the board together. You just put it into the adhesive and tap it back into place. So if you're doing a glue down timber floor, tongue and groove is the simplest locking system. Well, it's not even really a locking system, but the simplest joining system to use. If you're floating that timber floor, it's a different game. The tongue and groove is a lot more mucking around with the installation because you physically have to glue the product together as you do it. So typically a floated installation, a lot of people don't like to do that. For a floated installation with a locking system, timber's probably not the greatest one for the 2G join, just because there can be a little bit of lateral movement in the timber as it wants to cup and crown. So typically timber, the best long-term locking system is your four-sided lock, again going to the Unilin lock. But 5G is also really good. 5G is much faster to install. So it, probably long-term, maybe the edge goes to the four-sided lock, is specifically the Unilin. But the 5G, you'll do the job so much faster that I'd probably give the award to the 5G locking system in this space. The last one I guess we'll talk about is bamboo flooring. And there's not as much bamboo being laid today, which is a shame because it's a brilliant product and it suffers from what every category in an industry suffers from, is when it hits the market, it's oversold, people don't understand the product, and then when problems occur, they don't know why they occurred, and then they start blaming everything. And typically the blame goes back onto the product. But bamboo has been laid very successfully by people who knew how to do it. Now, the best locking system I found for bamboo is actually the 2G lock. When I was with Embleton years ago, we used a four-sided Unilin lock, and it was strong, but it was a pig to put together. It was an absolute beast to put together because the bamboo was so hard and so strong. And so getting it flat and tapping it up, I was literally having to belt these boards, and I hit my fingers a few times and lost a thumbnail and did all that sort of stuff. So there was a lot of swearing and cursing, and I wasn't particularly happy with that. It was a very strong locking system once it was down, but other suppliers were using a 2G drop lock, and it just made installation so easy. Now, because bamboo is so hard and so strong, that locking system held in place really well once you drop that other board in, and 2G was probably the best locking system that I'd worked with a bamboo floor. 5G didn't really come into bamboo as much. I know of one supplier who used 5G, but they don't do bamboo anymore. But I would say for bamboo, the award goes to the 2G locking system, just because of the nature of the product. It just works so well. It holds in place, it remains flat, and so the award there goes to the 2G locking system on the bamboo floor. So as you can see, each different locking system has its place, it shines, and has its place where probably another will do better, but they will all do the job at the end of the day. So look, if you have any questions about it, please feel free to give us a call and find us at onlineflooringstore.com.au. Cheers.